and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Let's begin with the conversations sparked by the winner of the Miss Universe Malaysia 2017 competition, Samantha Katie James. Now, in a posting on her social media account, she claimed that African Americans, quote, chose to be born as coloured, end quote. She also had called for those protesting against racism and police brutality to, quote-unquote, relax and take it as a challenge and accept it as it is. Now, all this is in reference to the ongoing protests of the death of George Floyd in the US. Now, I think, Sharaad, that the reaction to her comments have been quite interesting, and there's been quite a lot of criticism, criticism from many quarters, but I think there's also been a lot of conversation about her explanation that those remarks stem from the racial discrimination that she faced growing up in Malaysia. Quite interesting.
Yeah, Melissa, it's, you know, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this former beauty queen and her sense of the world. I mean, she seems rather confused, and it does seem like a waste of time since there are much more pressing matters to be looked at, including the question...
No, I disagree. I think that the response to this has been, we are, you know, there's a conversation about racism, whether the racism in Malaysia mirrors that of the racism in the US, whether we are educating ourselves about racism. I think that's something to be said there.
Right. I mean, of course, she has also spawned all kinds of memes of people saying, I'm of mixed heritage, but my soul has chosen to be white. And I mean, just jokes around the way in which she imagines her own identity vis-a-vis her actual, ethnic or linguistic heritage. I think all that aside, people around the world have found it necessary to weigh in on what's happening in the US. And I think that's very interesting. In New Zealand, thousands of people took to the street as an act of solidarity. I mean, not happening in Malaysia. And I'm not. The question is, of course, we are going through the pandemic, but that, of course, seems to affect none of these other groups of people around the world. They all seem to be able to, willing to congregate despite the pandemic. I do think, Melissa, it's a complicated question,
right.
And Samantha seems to be somebody who is profoundly inadequate in her expression of her concern. I mean, I don't know what her concern was at the end of the day. And I think Dato' Yasmin Yusof came out to say she read, these postings several times and was trying desperately to make head or tail of what she was saying. Yet, I think what was interesting, Melissa, was the other celebrities. Henry Golding came in, and also Yuna, and these are people, perhaps, who had a better sense of what's at stake in this particular struggle.
So I like that people were trying to understand where she was coming from. And I think in the way we're conversing nowadays, it's often that we kind of cancel people out very quickly. So it's good that people are trying to understand where she's coming from. But also, I think when it comes to the idea of, everyone begins from a place of ignorance. And what we do is...
Some people stay there, unfortunately, Melissa.
What we hopefully do is we educate ourselves. We get better informed about the different issues around the world. Nobody expects us to know everything. But perhaps before we're educated, we might want to keep those opinions to ourselves. All right.
Yeah, in fact, I think that was some of the good advice that she received. Though it really is, I think the much more important question is for those who are intervening and saying that there are parallels to draw when it comes to the American situation, the situation here. I think we have to be very careful not to be cavalier in drawing those parallels, but also not ignoring the fact that there are issues around police brutality. We have custodial deaths in this country, and of course the question, the perennial question of racism in this country needs a deft hand, I think.
Definitely for a longer conversation. But in other news, a recent poll by Astro AWANI has found that 91% of respondents said they believe politicians are not prioritizing the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and instead is focused on their own political interests. Now, I think this is interesting, Shah. A couple of things are interesting for us to think through tonight about this. First of all, I'm wondering what this public perception of the political drama actually represents, and also what is the real cause of the fatigue, this perceived fatigue, political fatigue by the public. And then that also posed the question, are there dangers of political fatigue or political apathy? What happens when we are tuned out or we switch off from what's happening in terms of the news, in terms of political developments?
Indeed, you know, it's an interesting way, and of course, all polls of this sort, you know, either succeed or fail on the basis of how they frame the question for the people who take part in it. But today, I mean, so we'll leave that aside. I do think, though, Melisa, that you know, sometimes we confuse ourselves with the use of expressions like politicking or political drama, and of course, you know, it really is a function of your appetite for political discussions and such, right? So for some people, I think they say, well, why doesn't government just get on with the work that is put before them? There's the pandemic, so the public health response, and then there's the economic dimension of that, and they're kind of looking at that. And I think on that score, very clearly, you know, the civil service, not the politicians, but the civil service has done an excellent job of providing leadership. So professionals in the health, you know, ministry have provided excellent leadership. Now, on the question of the economy and the question of the politics around it, including what we saw happening in Parliament, or the lack of parliamentary debate and scrutiny, I think that's where there is some measure of dysfunction when it comes to politics.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in terms of understanding the terms, the meaning of it. So whether we can separate politics from the governing of a country, whether we understand and recognize that instability of an administration has effects in policy making and all that. You know, it's very easy to say that you're tired of the political drama, that you are, you know, overexposed and you're fatigued by it, but to also understand that, you know, the practices like distributing GLC positions, like direct negotiations of contract, all of those under the guise of what is called politicking or politics, it's all very important. You have to recognize that that's part of things that we need to be vigilant about as watchful citizenry.
Yeah, and I guess, Melisa, you know, we're also, as a citizenry, learning a little bit about democracy as it, you know, has unfolded. We've had a lot of excitement in the last couple of years, you know, more than we had anticipated, including the, you know, the end of the 60-year rule of the Barisan National / you know, Alliance government that held power since independence. So people are not used to this. They're not used to change of government. They're not, especially at the federal level, they're not used to the idea that when a government's legitimacy is in question, it can be dysfunctional. And this, we see that at the state level, federal level. All that is something that perhaps we're going to take time to become accustomed to. So the new normal might be more political than it is about the pandemic and social distancing at the end of the day, Melisa.
All right, well, speaking of political drama, it can be argued that all this is being fueled by the factions within BERSATU. After this, we'll consider whether BERSATU is at the heart of the current administration's instability. Stay tuned to consider this. Watching Consider This. I'm Melisa. Idris, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. Political observers have pointed to Parti Pribumi Bersatu Malaysia, or better known as BERSATU, as being at the centre of the current administration's instability and challenged legitimacy. Now, there seems to be two main ongoing and intertwined battles taking place within the party. The first, for the command of the party, and the second for control of the government. To help us better understand the internal dynamics of BERSATU and where it's headed, we have joining us on the line the Deputy Youth and Sports Minister, one Ahmad Fayshal, one Ahmad Kamal. Fayshal, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on the public perception of the power struggle currently being fought within BERSATU. What is your read of the public's response to your party's factionalism?
Yeah, hello, Melisa. Yeah, basically, I think from the party point of view, this schism among the two camps must be resolved ASAP. Hence, the decision made last week with regard to the not expulsion, wrongly framed by certain quarters, but basically automatic removal of the membership of those 5 MPs were basically the last straw, I believe, in our effort to salvage the party from breaking up further. And of course, it's not pretty in public sight, but for the sake of the government's stability, we need to move on and abide to the rule of law as per stipulated in our party's constitution.
Fayshal, I want to ask you about this distinction that you made between expulsion and removal. What essentially means for many people the same thing, because it removes from internal party discussions individuals associated with the founding of the party. I mean, what's your personal position? Would you like to see Dr. Mahathir silenced when it comes to the future of Bersatu?
Basically, of course, at the moment, we have to agree, basically the party members have to agree and abide to the decision made by the highest body or authority in the party, which is the Supreme Council. That's binding as per explained in the Constitution. And as it is, Tun Mahathir is no longer the chairman due to the automatic revocation of his membership. And not to say that we do like Tun Mahathir to have a say, but as long as it does not contradict the fundamental way forward or the decision made by the Supreme Council, I think that should be the thing that the party members should toe the line according to the decision made by the Supreme Council. So I guess now there are big confusion out there among the party members because there are 2 schools of thoughts. One decided to leave Pakatan Harapan, another one to go back to Pakatan Harapan.
Fayshal, what does Bersatu stand for in terms of values? It seems to me that this is very personality-driven, but what does the party stand for?
The party stands for, as outlined in the Constitution and the vision of the party, basically explaining that we are fighting for the right of all Malaysians, but focusing on the rights of Malay and Bumiputra.
Okay, that doesn't seem to contradict what Tun Mahathir has spent his life fighting for. It does seem that Mahathir, diverges with the leadership of Muhyiddin Yassin on one point, which is corruption and cooperation with politicians alleged to be involved in massive corruption. What's your position on the question of continued relationships with political parties that have been tainted by charges of corruption?
Well, as it is, we can see that there are no appointments made by the government, by the Prime Minister, on those who have clear-cut criminal cases. And I think that's a clear commitment by the government of the day to uphold the rule of law and also the principle where Bersatu stands originally. I don't see that as a big problem at the moment.
Okay. You are also quoted in the media saying that ratings currently show that Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin and the Perikatan Nasional Coalition are accepted by the majority of Malaysians. Fayshal, could you help clarify which ratings you were referring to?
All right. Okay. Definitely, at the moment, what I get from the social media and also my personal engagement with the civil servants and also the public out there, the general sentiment, especially among the Malay, especially in the rural areas, are very positive towards the Prime Minister himself, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. And this, of course, we would love to have a formal census on the support. Maybe Bodega Center can come up with the ratings. Okay. But from what we get from the random sampling in social media, in many media platforms, I guess the support is there. And this is particularly true for the Prime Minister himself.
So, Fayshal, this is anecdotal, not scientific. I do want to ask you, in terms of pure numbers, how many MPs support the administration at this point? How many MPs line up behind Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin?
Well, as it is, we have, from the parliament seating, you can see that at least we have 116. Yeah? And this does not count those who are in the opposition that will give support to any motion, especially, for example, budget, that to ensure that the government can provide the basic necessities for the people comes for the parliamentary voting in certain motions.
Yeah, but we had, Sharaad Mohammad Saleh, yes, Deputy Works Minister, and Sri Gading MP voicing some unhappiness about the fact that when you did have an opportunity to debate questions around responses to the COVID pandemic at Parliament, Parliament was, limited to just 1 hour. And he seems to be very unhappy with what's happening. Says that in July, we expect some sort of response. Are you anticipating a revolt from your own backbenchers in July?
At the moment, I don't think so. We are still in control. We are handling our MPs carefully at the moment. And of course, come July sitting, I think we will have a full debate with regard to the COVID and other matters.
Fayshal, you're also competing to be Bersatu Youth Chief. I would like to get a sense from you. What is it you think that Bersatu Youth want at the moment? What is it that they want spoken up for?
Definitely, at the moment, the grassroots is very much understands that we need to be and move forward with Perikatan Nasional. This is the way forward. We have learned and experienced a bitter lesson in Pakatan Harapan by associating ourselves with DAP, which is a big stigma and also a big contention point with regard to the Malay support at the grassroots level. So when my former predecessor, YB Syed Saddiq, made a call to return to Pakatan Harapan, 2/3 of Armada at the grassroots level from all divisions rejected that motion. So as a new contender for the youth chief for Armada, I am committed to support Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin as our president to move forward in Perikatan Nasional.
Fayshal, last question for you, from me at least. The question of your relationship to UMNO and PAS, all of you, all these three parties competing for the same ground. Do you think it's likely that UMNO and PAS will give way to Bersatu, or is Bersatu more likely to be absorbed by the larger parties of UMNO and PAS?
I believe there will be a fair exchange of seats between the three parties. Why? Because Bersatu has the upper hand with regard to the Prime Minister. The feel-good factor among the people lies with Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. In order for us to secure a big win in coming GE, or whether soon or later, rests on how strong Tan Sri Muhyiddin is. So I believe Bersatu will have an upper hand in this.
Right. Well, Fayshal, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We appreciate your time and for joining us on the show. We're going to take a quick break. More on Consider This in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our conversation about the deep divisions within Bersatu and what the conflicts will mean for the longevity of the Perikatan Nasional plus GPS government. Bridget Welsh is an Honorary Research Associate of the Asia Research Institute at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Bridget, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you wrote recently that the factionalism in Bersatu is shaping national politics, similar to the way UMNO's factionalism did decades earlier. But UMNO is a large, dominant party, whereas Bersatu is a small and relatively new party in comparison. Now, can you help us, Bridget, understand how Bersatu came to have such an impact on the stability of the current government?
I think there are two major reasons. The first is that you're dealing with a situation where smaller parties have more influence because the situation is so fluid. Any party that has more than 10 seats can really actually determine who becomes government. So this is true for almost all the key parties. There are about 9 major groupings of parties at this particular juncture. The second thing, of course, is that this was the vehicle that brought Mahathir into power. And of course, Mahathir led Pakatan Harapan. And at that time, also, you have a situation where it is now the vehicle also for the current prime minister. And so it is the premier party. It's not the dominant in terms of numbers, but it is the party that controls the premiership, the prime ministership. And as a consequence, it has disproportionate amounts of people who are given positions. And of course, the conflicts within it determine the issues of the leadership for the country. So it's the position within the hierarchy of parties in the coalition, as well as the nature of the coalition politics being so fluid.
Bridget, when it comes to the idea of how Bersatu was going to grow post the last general election, absorbing UMNO members, building up its own base, has it succeeded in that? And what is the likelihood of its sort of bargaining power when it comes to the next general election, assuming we go to GE15 vis-a-vis UMNO and PAS?
So we saw originally when Bersatu came into office, which was really a personal vehicle for Muhyiddin and Mahathir, particularly Mahathir. He was the heavyweight and was the heavyweight in the party. So what happened initially is that they was envisioned as being another alternative to UMNO, and they worked to try to build the mass base, but it wasn't functioning. The machinery wasn't operative. It didn't have the numbers, and also we're in a different situation in Malaysian politics. Building mass-based politics, mass-based parties, it's not as viable as it was because there's more competition and there's not enough resources, and so it just didn't function. So Bersatu grew by bringing in defectors, and of course, many of these defectors were from UMNO. So as a consequence, it became, and also again in the mold of UMNO, but at the same juncture, bringing in people who are actually had different positions on the key issues that formed the party together, particularly in terms of issues of Najib, in terms of dealing with issues of accountability, as well as issues of standing up and kind of changing positions in terms of some aspects of reform. And there were common grounds with some of these defectors in terms of patronage and issues of race politics, but there were also some key differences because these were also fed some of the differences in personalities within. So as a party, as it expanded, it really doesn't have its own political base. It's divided in deep factions within it. It's a party that is actually very fragmented. It doesn't have very long roots. And so it has a real challenge in terms of dealing with issues of the election. It wants to say that it sort of competes to be controlling a large shares of the Malay community, but in fact, actually, electorally, it doesn't. It elected only 13 MPs. It's now, numbers are supposedly over 30, although some of this is very ambiguous because the loyalties, as you've mentioned earlier in the program, are constantly fluid and changing. Right. But in these numbers, it's not clear they win.
Okay, Bridget. So because the factions are so personality-driven, it's loyalties to certain personalities. With the removal of the memberships of one side of one of the factions, do you think that the divisions within Bersatu are now resolved?
Of course not. I think that it's a party election, and of course we can see that that there are also going to be challenges to these people who've been pushed out of the party by people within the party that have remained. And so I think that the party is going through high levels of conflict, and of course it's inwardly focused, can't reach out to the electorate. So if in fact the PN government falls, and one of the options is that there is an election called, that in fact Bersatu doesn't have the gravitas to be able to engage the electorate in a meaningful way.
Bridget, between the two, between Pakatan Harapan and UMNO and PAS as a grouping, which is the greater threat to Bersatu?
Well, I would say that in terms of the PN itself, the biggest threat is, of course, UMNO itself. UMNO has more political power in terms of numbers in the coalition. It has better machinery, and of course, it wants to be in power. And we can see that this has been playing out over a period of time, and is continuing to play out. And it's not a coincidence that UMNO is calling for many factions in UMNO are calling for elections at this particular juncture. But I think in terms of Harapan itself is equally a threat. We can see that Mahathir is back as a major political force. There has been considerable fluidity and movement in numbers, and that means a shift.
Bridget, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us tonight. That is all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.